Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. This is the second panel in our two-part Rightsizing the Juvenile Court lunch webinar series. Today we'll be discussing the case for reforming Indiana law on prosecuting children in adult courts. I'm Lisa Pettis, a senior fellow with the Criminal Justice and Civil Liberties Department at the R Street Institute. R Street is a nonpartisan think tank promoting free market and limited effective government. Prior to my role with R Street, I have previously served as a prosecutor, a city councilor, and executive director for Victim Services Organization and Child Advocacy Center. I'm honored to facilitate this discussion today. First, some housekeeping. We will be doing a question and answer with our panelists for approximately 50 minutes today, followed by questions from attendees. If you have questions, you can drop those in the Q&A box. If you're having issues hearing, you can go ahead and use the chat box. At times, I may cut off our panelists if we're getting a little bit behind time because we have a lot of information to cover. I also want to warn you that today we are having technology difficulties all over the place. So if somebody freezes, we are going to move to the next panelist immediately just to make sure that we are being respectful of time. Also, this panel is being recorded. Indiana law requires some children's cases to be sent to adult courts without any review by a judge. These laws deprive children of the support and services provided in juvenile courts and can ultimately lead to higher rates of recidivism. The Indiana Supreme Court strongly encouraged the General Assembly to amend the process to waive children to adult court, creating an opportunity to fix these harmful laws. Today, we will discuss with experts and individuals with personal experiences in the system how Indiana can increase public safety and promote a fairer and less costly system that still holds children accountable when they break the law. For the panelists today, we've invited individuals with different backgrounds and areas of expertise so they can answer questions from different perspectives. For our panelists, we have Ryan Mears. He's the Marion County prosecutor. After graduating from Cardinal Ritter High School in Indianapolis, Ryan attended and played basketball at St. Joseph's College. Ryan then obtained his law degree from the Indiana University, Robert H. McKinney School of Law, after completing Law County Prosecutor's Office. An accomplished criminal trial attorney, he has personally led the prosecution of murders and violent crimes and understands the deep commitment that drives prosecutors in seeking justice for victims. During his 15 years as a deputy prosecutor, Ryan tried more than 100 jury and bench trials. As chief trial deputy in the prosecutor's office, Ryan championed reform, innovation, and leadership while carrying a caseload along with his fellow deputy prosecutors. As the Marion County prosecutor, Ryan continues to focus on the most serious crimes in Indianapolis while working with leaders to address the root causes of violence. James Wilson is the founder and CEO of Circle Up Indy. Is a native of the Martindale-Brightwood area on the east side of Indianapolis. James is a true testament to how one can turn their life around regardless of the past. Mr. Wilson served most of his life in and out of incarceration as a teen from 11 to 17 and was waived as an adult at 17 years old to adult. Had an interview with Fox 59, which featured him as a growing leader and an active volunteer in the community. James knew from personal experience that there are little to no resources or help for individuals. Circle Up Indy, a nonprofit organization which serves as a concierge of resources to the community, resulting in less violence and building a stronger community. James has served as CEO of Circle Up Indy for the past 9+ years. Circle Up Indy's focus is socioeconomic evolution, community development, engagement, housing, and community self-stability. James has also served on numerous other boards and committees, including appointment by the Indiana Supreme Court to serve on the Indiana Youth Justice Oversight Committee, one of the first community resource coordinators for the City of Indianapolis Office of Public Health and Safety, co-chair for the Opportunity, Justice and Reentry, and former and first president of the Indiana 100 Black Men Collegiate 100 chapter. Josh Rovner manages a portfolio of juvenile justice issues for the Sentencing Project, including juveniles sentenced to life without parole, the transfer of juveniles into the adult criminal justice system, and racial and ethnic disparities in juvenile justice. His work has supported reforms in numerous states through research and testimony. He's the author of several papers and fact sheets for the Sentencing Project, including How Tough on Crime Became Tough on Kids, Prosecuting Teenage Drug Charges in Adult Courts, and Racial Disparities in Youth Commitments and Arrests, and has had opinion pieces published in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Houston Chronicle, and The Hartford Courant. An expert in child and adolescent well-being, Josh has worked on juvenile development issues such as access to primary and mental health care, tobacco prevention, and comprehensive health education. Josh previously worked at the School-Based Health Alliance, Metro Teen AIDS, and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and the Council of District of Columbia. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Rochester and a Master of Public Policy from the George Washington University. John T. Vance was sent to an adult prison to die for crimes committed at age 15. Placed directly in the general jail population, John struggled to survive while trying to cope with his own internal struggles. Despite having no objective hope for release, John sought to better himself and ameliorate the lives of others. His efforts were rewarded in the most unlikely fashion, a modification of sentence. After 31 years in prison, the state-raised child is now a man and returning citizen, learning to carve out a new life in a foreign land society. Dr. Jennifer Woolard is a professor of psychology and an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University. She began her career at the National Victims Resource Center. While obtaining her doctoral degree in developmental and community psychology at the University of Virginia, she also served as a victim witness volunteer in the County Police Department, a staff member to the Virginia Commission on Family Violence Prevention, and a consultant with Virginians Against Domestic Violence. She then joined the MacArthur Foundation Research Network on Adolescent Development and Juvenile Justice and became an assistant professor at the University of Florida's Center for Studies in Criminology and Law. In 2002, she joined the psychology faculty at Georgetown University. Her research and action laboratory studies individual and family experiences with systems of care and control in order to create fair, effective, and just legal processes. Projects examine how youth and parents understand the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, and the right to trial. Her lab is the evaluation partner for the Youth in Custody Practice Model Initiative, which helps juvenile correctional institutions implement evidence-informed and developmentally appropriate practices. Dr. Woolard has testified as an expert before federal and state legislatures, as well as in criminal cases. We have a very accomplished group here today. So I wanted to start off with our first question, which is, how does the system treat juveniles during the waiver process? It's an extremely important question for a lot of people that don't know how this process works. And I wanted to start with County Attorney Mears to really talk about the technical and logistical parts of how this system works. Can you answer that question for us?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's good to see my good friend James Wilson here. Anytime I'm on a panel with him, I'm feeling pretty good about life. Really it's divided into two different categories. You know, once you hit that age of 16, there is no waiver process. It's an automatic file in quite a few number of offenses here in the state of Indiana. Once you're, if you're less than 16 years of age, then there is some discretion afforded to the prosecutor's office and the judge to determine whether or not an individual should be waived into adult court. But on the vast majority of offenses, when we talk about the more serious offenses, when we talk about our robbery cases, a lot of the sex crimes, murder cases, things of that nature, once you hit that age of 16 years old, there is no waiver process. And the prosecutor's office does not even have the option to file something in a juvenile court. It has to be filed into adult court. So Indiana is pretty harsh as it relates to what types of cases a juvenile court can even hear. The way the law is written, it says that juvenile courts don't even have jurisdiction to hear those matters for individuals once they turn 16 years of age. And then there's also a number of enhancements that could put somebody into the adult court. For instance, if you have more than one possession of a firearm as a child, it can then be filed directly into adult court. If there's an allegation that you're involved in a criminal gang activity and you commit a crime, that can be filed into adult court without that waiver process. And so it's really pretty harsh in the state of Indiana, just because there's not a lot of discretion. There's not a lot of opportunities to have those evaluations, not only by clinical professionals, but also judges to make determinations. Is this in the best interest of the child, and is this in the best interest of the community to put individuals in adult court? And so that's just kind of a snapshot of what goes on in the state of Indiana currently. Certainly on a number of offenses, if you're 16, 17 years old, you can be prosecuted as a juvenile or as a kid if you meet certain if there's certain statutory offenses. But there's a significant number of offenses, most of them with a direct nexus to violence, where there's no question it's just going into adult court.
County Attorney Mears, if you could just briefly also explain the difference between juvenile court and adult court for those that may not know.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is when you're in juvenile court, I mean, people are looking for opportunities the judges just have so much more discretion in terms of what resources they can provide to individuals. It's more of a collaborative process with not only the prosecutor's office, but with the family. What resources can we provide to this individual? How can we provide placement in a manner that maybe makes more sense for the child? Those are the types of questions that you have. Once you get into adult court, there's not near the number of resources. The parent is no longer sitting at the table with the child. That kid is on their own. And really the question a lot of times is just how long is the jail sentence going to be, as opposed to what type of programming is available. And so it's a pretty significant difference in terms of the approach of the two systems, especially when you talk about the different levels of crimes that involve people getting directly placed into the adult system. And one of the challenges that we have in our community is, we have a lot of kids who are 16, 17 years old, and then they're used to being in the juvenile system. They're used to having their parents involved. They're used to having this kind of collaborative process. Okay, what can we do to help? Then bam, they hit 18 and the game completely changes. And it's just, are you guilty or not? And are you going to the Department of Correction or not? And that's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to process, a lot of families to handle, and really puts a lot of people at a disadvantage in our community.
Thank you for that explanation. John, I'd like to go to you next to talk more about what it was like for you personally experiencing going through that process.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. For me, it was overwhelming. So I went to my waiver hearing 2 days after my arrest. I was still very much trying to cope with the crimes that I had committed. I was trying to cope with the prospect of not seeing loved ones anymore, of being in prison for the rest of my life, not understanding the process. I was confused. The process really wasn't explained to me. And that was one of those things that I didn't have a way of processing it. And there was really no preparation or anybody that could help me in that respect, deal with not only my social history problems, not only my regret of my crimes and remorse for my crimes and things of that nature, but trying to understand the process of what was going to happen next. I just had no clue.
And John, if I want to have you go ahead and turn off your video. We could hear you, but I want to make sure that we hear you clearly. So if you want to turn off your video, that might help. And I do want to go on to James next. You have both the perspective of living it personally, but also working as a professional in this area, watching people or children being waived into the adult courts. Can you tell me from your perspective on what you've seen that system be like?
Oh, wow. First off, let me back up a little bit. Prosecutor Mears, always a pleasure to see you and work alongside you. And been working with the prosecutor for some time to really get a better understanding, even when Terry Carey's in there, about not just with the young people to go through, but the whole wraparound component. Going back to when I was younger and the experiences that I went through, I think Ryan Mears just kind of really hit it hard, something I didn't really think about. How they didn't come talk to me about being waived over, not sitting down with my parents, none of the things happened. They came and got me straight out of school at a Perry Marine High School. And they arrested me, and on TV and stuff, and they arrested me, didn't explain anything, didn't inform my parents or even the school that they was coming to grab me. They came and grabbed me without a search warrant at all, because they felt as though that I'm going to be charged as an adult. They don't have to treat me like a juvenile at all, and they didn't treat me like such. None of the processes was explained to me, none whatsoever, and I was confused. I was trying to figure out what just happened, what's going on. I'm thinking in my mind, the officers came and got me. I'm going to go to juvenile, And back in the day, when I used to go to juvenile all the time, they used to put you on C. Charles, or what they call the Hope Unit. That's when you get waived over to adult court, or when the judge is making the decision. And so that was my expectation while the years have been incarcerated in a juvenile center, but none of that happened. And so next thing you know, I'm running in front of Judge Hawkins, and a decision's been made from there. Like Ryan said, it's either penitentiary or not from that point forward. And so now looking at it now, I've been on a professional level, seeing so many different components of misinformation, lack of information and understanding for the families. And so now with the prosecutor's office, I've watched them work with the families, and not even the prosecutor's office, the juvenile courts, on a transitional basis and pieces to make sure the families are fully aware, and even put preventative steps in for them not to be charged an adult if they don't have to possibly be charged an adult if the crime doesn't render that pieces. So moving modern day forward, I think it's a situation to where we need to have more information out there so families and individuals, especially young people, are highly aware. That's why I'm working with the Jeopardy program this summer at our Peace Festival to bring more of that information to the community on more of the legal terms in that matter. But more importantly, I think it's a situation where we really need to evaluate throughout the state the process of, number one, if people are even eligible to be charging an adult, and with the circumstances that they really need to consider and look at. Number two, another thing they need to look at is making sure that juveniles are fully legally aware. You know, they're quick to read our Miranda, and heck, the day that I got arrested, they didn't read my Miranda, but fully aware. And then three, that the families, the parents are fully aware, engaged along in those processes.
Professor, I'd love for you to chime in now, and kind of bringing in that developmentally age-appropriate thoughts of this process, and how the science behind that may challenge the idea of waiving people or directly filing people up into adult court.
Sure, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with the rest of the panel to talk. I think there's two main categories or ways that we can think about the developmental science as it relates to transfer and what we're talking about. One, which Mr. Wilson was just talking about, is the process itself and how well or not well youth are able to understand and participate in that process. And then the other category, right, is the actual experience of adult court and adult sentencing, and what the impact may be on their future once they are released. So we know from decades of behavioral research and recent several decades of research with brain technology that mid-adolescents, older adolescents are continuing to develop their capacities that are relevant to their performance as a defendant, to the conduct that they engage in. That continues to develop well into the 20s, actually, in terms of capacities like being able to take other perspectives, thinking about the future, understanding risk and things like that. So from some of the research that our lab and other labs have done, we know that it is quite challenging for many adolescents to understand how the criminal justice process works, what their rights are, what it means to assert or not assert those rights, to understand the roles of the folks who are involved in the process. So not only from a basic kind of competence to stand trial perspective, but from the developmental capacities that one needs to be an effective defendant and to make decisions in one's best interest. So we know that it's challenging for our older adolescents to do that. We also know that the prosecution as an adult and then sentencing in adult court likely for most does not accomplish what perhaps the goals of the system might have. We know that it can often increase negative outcomes and negative experiences, trauma, and raise the risk factors that we have for recidivism once they are released back into the community. So I would say from a developmental perspective, both in terms of the process of transfer or waiver or automatic charging as an adult, the experience of the court process itself, and then the kinds of sentencing and outcome and correctional options that they experience, that it would be safe to say they're not developmentally tailored or appropriate, and that they will often have fairly significant negative impacts on their direct experience and their life trajectory going forward.
Professor, I think you hit on a key point there, which is what we're trying to accomplish by putting people in the system. And so, Josh, I'd like to go to you next to first talk about how the system treats juveniles during a direct file or transfer. And I'd love for you to talk about how other states might be doing this. But then I'd also like for you to start to answer that next question, which is, how does charging juveniles as adult actually affect public safety?
So I'm glad that you start there, because I want to translate something Dr. Woolard said into English. She wrote down, I wrote it down. She said, raise risk factors for recidivism. Another way of saying that is that this causes crime. Kids who are charged as if they're adults are more likely to reoffend on felony charges than similarly situated kids who are charged in the juvenile system and sentenced there as well. We have decades of research about this. This is unapologetically a public safety agenda, because sending kids to adult court makes it more likely that they will get arrested again than if we send them to juvenile court. And that's not because the juvenile court is so lenient. The facilities in the juvenile system are more than capable of keeping the doors locked, more than capable of connecting kids with the services they need to understand what it is that caused their offending in the first place. We're talking about 16 and 17-year-olds, and the older that my kids get, the more fascinated I am by this conversation. I got a 15-year-old at home who's thinking about getting her driver's license right now. That's where 15-year-old heads are at. And the idea of long-term consequences and understanding how it works, this is sort of the role of a parent, right? Is to connect kids with understanding the consequences of their actions. And you heard from the county attorney that it's really a punishment focus in the adult system. It's not about addressing behaviors, it's about punishment when you send kids into the adult system, when you send adults into the adult system. So it's not all that surprising to see higher offending rates. Also, and this gets to something that James and John were saying about sort of understanding what they were going through. And so I can understand for a lot of people listening to this, you may think there's a deterrent effect, that by having a harsher penalty on the books, that kids are more likely to have a deterrent effect. 16-year-olds do not read the criminal code of the state of Indiana. Period. They don't, the deterrent effect doesn't work because kids like John and James and my daughter don't understand exactly what's going to happen to them when they misbehave. And also, they don't really think they're going to get caught, right? That's something that we all understand about teenagers. So what's the alternative? The alternative is starting all of the cases in juvenile court so that we can look at the factors of their individual involvement, how they've been in the system before, and programming that they may or may not have taken advantage of, what their individual involvement in the crime was. These are things that a juvenile court can, before waiving a kid up. This does not in any way close the door to charging a kid as if they're an adult. And we have lots of examples of states that do this already. You may think that it's states like California and Hawaii, pretty blue places, and they're on that list, but it's also Kansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas. All cases involving juveniles start in the juvenile court, and kids do get waived up with some regularity from those states, but everything starts in the juvenile court. And that's where they ought to begin, because we're talking about kids, and the juvenile courts are capable of making those decisions.
Thank you. And Professor, I want to give you a chance again. I know you kind of already hit on this question, but if you wanted to add anything about how does charging juveniles as an adult actually affect public safety?
Right. Well, I appreciate Josh's translation there of the work, because we don't often speak in causal terms on the science side of things. From correlational kinds of data. But in terms of affecting public safety, I mean, the question would be, as Josh was alluding to, right? Does the risk of reoffending decrease, right, or eliminated, depending on the kind of processing that we have for kids and the outcome? And I think the vast bulk of the research is fairly clear in that whether we think about deterrence, whether we think about other kinds of goals of the system, that we don't see reductions in reoffending when we compare similarly situated youth who are processed in juvenile court versus in criminal court. And then we also see the secondary effects, right, of essentially growing up in an adult facility as opposed to a juvenile facility, an adult facility in a system that's not designed to respond to the developmental needs of children. And so we certainly see, you know, risk of experiencing more violence, more trauma, not receiving the educational and other kinds of rehabilitative services that may be more likely to be offered and be available in a juvenile court process or in a juvenile facility.
And we're going to get to that question in a second too, which is how does this affect the individual in particular? But James, I'd love to get your perspective as well. You know, anecdotally, what have you heard from others? What did you experience? How is charging children as adults affecting public safety?
It's a major crisis. You're setting them up for failure. I mean, to be honest with you, when you take a child, think about it from any perspective. Anybody that has children on this call, on this line, if you have your child, the child that you raised, you know so well, and you place that child into an adult situation of incarceration, knowing all the possibilities and the things they may be exposed to, stop and think psychologically. More importantly, let's go back to the psychological standpoint. Psychologically, the effects that it have in the future. Because, and I'll stay on psychological aspect of it, because at that end, that child or that individual can't see, fully understand, or process what's around them. They will adapt to their environment, right? Just to be a part. And when they adapt to their environment is not always good. And so that enhances their abilities, potentially enhances their abilities to come back and reoffend. Because in those conversations, being locked up, we don't sit down at the table and say, hey guys, well, we're going to do good today, getting back out in society, and we got years ago. And I mean, John can contest to that. Being young, going to prison, my first day in prison, I got in a fight, automatically started gangbanging. My first day in prison. So when I got in there, got in a fight, walking around with knives bigger than me. I'm a little guy. Walk around with knives bigger than me. I happen to get involved in the drug trade. Everything that goes on in incarceration. It's nothing but the streets confined. So your enemy that you seen on the streets that you couldn't get to because he's hiding house to house, I can stab him because he's right here now. And so with that being said, we put our children in a state of survival instead of thriving. If we go back and look at the root causes, I love what Josh is just speaking about, looking at the juvenile courts for evaluations. If other states are already doing it, when you fully evaluate them young people, you look at the root cause. What are they going through? They have mental health addiction, drug addiction. Things are those factors to really equate if they fully understood the crime they committed. So with that being said, putting a child in an adult situation at a young age is putting them in a very dangerous state for the future. There's no thriving, if anything. There's constantly state of survival.
Thanks, James. John, I'd like to go to you next. What are your thoughts on that? How does having a child in an adult prison systems or going through the adult courts affect public safety?
From my perspective, like, I entered this system, I was scared to death. I have no like gang background, street background, anything. I'm a kid from the suburbs and didn't have any prior knowledge of any of that type of life. So when I walk in, I am wholly unprepared, not only for prison, but for the lifestyle that the prisoners have led prior to them getting in that situation. And so when I walk in, I'm scared to death. I'm young. I'm like 5'6", 130 pounds, not equipped, not a fighter. So I get, and the first thing I get is a 230 pound, 6'4" guy asking me where I'm from. You know, he's very intimidating. Just his presence is intimidating. And I very early on had to decide, do I join a gang in order to find a way to survive for protection? Do not join a gang and then take what comes with that. You place me in this criminal culture where all of the rules are the opposite of what society says we should be doing, and then tell me to get better. Like, that to me doesn't make sense.
Thank you for that perspective. County Attorney Mears, I'd like to go to you next, and I'd like for you to not only talk about how you see charging children as adults may affect public safety, but also how you have seen how it affects the child themselves by going into the adult process.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges you have is that, there's a lot of young people who end up in the adult system, and we're not really looking at those. What can we do to try to do to help change behavior? It very much becomes what can we do to punish. And I think we give up on a lot of young people when we make that decision and when we make that choice to put kids in the adult system, and oftentimes the prosecutor's office, at least in the state of Indiana, doesn't really have much say or voice in that process, just because there are so many offenses that are automatic waivers in the state of Indiana. And I always tell people this when I speak to people in the community: there are very few people who go to the Department of Correction for the rest of their lives. Most of these individuals are coming back to our community, and we need to ask ourselves, do we want that individual to be better off or not when they come back into our community? And in the vast majority of cases, when you're dealing with young people, when we send them to an adult prison, when we send them to the Department of Correction, we know they're coming back at some point in time, but there's very little energy and effort put into making those kids better than what they were when they were placed in the system. And that's a real challenge that we have. And as a consequence, because we don't make those investments, we have kids who come back into our communities who learned probably what not to do in prison, and have spent their most formative years when they're developing and really trying to figure out life and how they're going to approach life in a prison. When they come back into our community, oftentimes we do see them immediately have contact with the criminal justice system. And so I do think it makes a lot of sense for us to have that evaluation period to see, is there a way that maybe we can put somebody on the track of being successful? What resources, what opportunities are available to try to help that individual prior to just placing them in the adult system? Certainly there are going to be cases where, as a prosecutor, I do think it's going to be appropriate to prosecute juveniles as adults. But I also think there's going to be situations where it's appropriate to pursue another path and make sure that we are investing in the family and in the child and in that child's community to hopefully try to get the most out of that kid, so we're not just throwing them away. And oftentimes when you send kids to the Department of Correction, we are putting up insurmountable obstacles or very steep obstacles to people who oftentimes have the lowest amount of family support, peer support. And then when they come back in our community, we look at them and we say, well, why aren't you successful? When we've done very little to invest in those kids or give those kids an opportunity for success.
I'd like to expand upon that last point you said, which is getting back into the community. James, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you've already spoken a little bit about the personal detriments of being in the adult system as a juvenile, but what about when you come out? What kind of detriments are there at that point in time?
Well, first off, let me say this. I am more than honored and humble to be on this panel, number one, and even be where I'm at, number two. Because coming home from prison 9 years ago this year was probably the hardest struggle, and still is, on so many different levels you can possibly think of, and allow me to be frank. As a Black male coming home from incarceration in the state of Indiana, it's not easy. For me to be where I'm at right now, I had to fight because I was constantly told, there's no opportunity for you. You made your mistake. You had your time and your chance. They was basically giving up. Society gave up. And so I had to keep pushing. I had to show my worth even to be where I'm at. So deep down, you got other people that not able to transition like that. Some people will give up. I've seen it happen. I had friends of mine that I was locked up with in prison, and I came home. We started our own path. Some tried so hard. Some got tired, but I refused to give up. Until this day, I still deal with it. As a Black male, the ideas I got with my organization, sometimes Prosecutor Mears and I talk about it. It's a struggle. So with that being said, when we look at trying to get somebody to thrive, we got to put our whole part into it. I believe in the 360 effect, a holistic approach. Me coming home from prison, if it wasn't for people like Ryan or yourself, even Josh or Jennifer or John, that actually, adheres, guide us, and puts us on the right path, then there's no hope at all. There's no inspiration. There's no evolution. It's the hamster in the repeated circle, or in the little thing, they end a little thing, they spin around, and it's constantly going to keep happening. Why? Because we come home constantly trying to, thrive and survive in so many different perspectives, but we can't catch a balance. It becomes an uneven balance for us. So if we work together collectively, create that even balance, both for adults in their families, young people in their families, we create a trajectory of strong development for our community and for our young people.
Thank you for that. Josh, can you talk a little bit about the statistics? Like, what are we seeing happens with individuals that have been charged as adults?
Well, the data generally will look at sort of long-term outcomes of similarly situated kids. And so this is a study from the CDC that showed kids are about 33% more likely to reoffend, again, on more serious charges when they're charged as adults. National Research Council put out a study in 2014 affirming those findings and others and recommending that all cases start in juvenile court. These are, the kind of peer-reviewed studies that really ought to be informing public policy, and they all point in one direction. And it's, toward the public safety answer of keeping kids in juvenile court. So you're muted.
Professor, can you talk a little bit about the science behind the impacts on children and adult systems?
Sure. So if we're talking again about that process and then the experience of incarceration, right? Adolescents and late adolescents, there's a lot of developmental jobs that they're supposed to be accomplishing to make this transition from childhood to adulthood. And so if we think about the environment of the adult system or the adult prison system, as James was saying, as the place where some kids are growing up and having those formative years spent there, we just know that that's not the kind of environment in which healthy development can really happen, right? Developing your own identity. What are the messages that you're receiving about who you are and what you're worth, right? How are you connecting with peer groups? Transitioning to peers away from parents is an important job of late adolescence. And so if we think about a peer group in prison, it's a much different kind of peer group than we probably wish for many of our youth, right? We also know experiences of victimization are quite high, and serious victimization high in the adult system. So these are just examples of the kinds of context in which the growing up happens, right? So the impact of trauma, the less likelihood of receiving developmentally appropriate services, right? Be it education, be it mental health services, be it medical services, right? For the physical health of the changing adolescent body into the young adulthood. We just know that these can have tremendous impacts. And as Josh was mentioning, negative certainly impacts, right, on the youth that are growing up in those contexts. And as we know, almost all of them are coming back, right? So we're thinking about how do we think about those formative years and what the impact is of having that as your adolescent environment and your young adult environment, and then coming back into the community, being expected, right, to have had that normative development and to function in ways that it would be hard to imagine of functioning when you haven't had the supports and the context in which to develop those capacities and to have those experiences and to have the experiences that we talk about with a little bit of a safety net around them, right? So we expect adolescents and young adults to not be perfect, but we try to create a supportive safety net so that those mistakes or those learning opportunities don't significantly detrimentally, right, challenge their future opportunities.
Thank you. And we have received some great questions already. Reminder to attendees that you can put your questions in the Q&A. To make sure that we get through all of our information and get those questions, I will ask that all of you try and shorten your answers just a little bit, but I also don't want to miss any of this great information. I know John's internet's kind of going in and out. John, are you back with us? All right, so waiting for him. Professor, can you just go on to, these are the challenges we're facing with the current system. But a lot of people have said, we need to have this in place to keep juveniles held accountable. What are the other options to help a juvenile evolve or change to become a productive member of society? As County Attorney Mears pointed out, the vast majority of these juveniles that go through the adult system are getting back out.
Right. So I guess, we need to unpack the idea of accountable. And I think it might have been Josh that said this before, right? The juvenile justice system and its responses hold kids accountable, right? It's not a walk in the park in the juvenile system. But the thing that I want to emphasize is that even for youth, older adolescents, right, who engage in serious violent crime, right? I think there was a comment maybe in the chat saying, but by definition, isn't it the case perhaps that, by virtue of the kind of crime folks commit, that they aren't able to be rehabilitated? We have interventions that successfully work with older adolescents and their families, older adolescents who have committed really significant crime, right? But taking a comprehensive approach, a developmentally tailored approach to that youth, to the family and the supports that are around them, can hold them accountable, but also then work towards those positive trajectories, right, to increase the likelihood that things are going to go well for them and that they will make good choices when they're coming out of that system. So I guess I would come back to this notion of what do we mean by accountable? If accountable means understanding what happened, taking responsibility for your actions and learning different ways of behaving and responding, then it seems to me as a developmental scientist, right, that a developmentally informed approach that takes into account the age and the development is our best opportunity for simultaneously holding kids accountable and protecting public safety by reducing the likelihood that they will continue on that trajectory once they return to their community.
John, are you back with us yet? James, if you could weigh in here, how do we get a juvenile who many times could be now adult, but how do we get them to evolve or change from that behavior?
I love the fact that you use the word evolve. So as you always hear me say, the difference between change and evolution. Change is progressive or regressive, but evolution, we move things forward. And so the goal of the Indiana Youth Justice Oversight Committee for the state is to how we move our young people in our society forward. The accountability factor definitely needs to exist, but think about it from a psychological stance. I keep talking about psychology because it is a huge factor because that child has not fully developed. I myself, at the age of 15, 16, 17 years old, can't tell you how to run a whole banking institution and even run a whole legal criminal justice institute, let alone look at the evaluate. Okay, if I know some things are wrong or right, absolutely. But to see, because when you're stuck in a state of your environment, constantly trying to survive, whatever you do, you're going to feel is right. You're constantly trying to get ahead. So we have to break down and have to cognitively help these young people fully understand every aspect of life. That means parents being involved. That means schools being involved. That means the whole wraparound approach, because he can't or she can't understand it just from this point of view. You have to have many points of view so you can see the bigger perspective of life. I think that to me was key. If I would have seen that at a younger age, I would have definitely thought twice before I started walking around with that gun every day. Before I started walking around thinking about I'm going to rob something, I would have thought twice because I seen a perspective of life and understanding of life, opportunity truly exists, right? So now I'm able to put myself or surround myself by individuals that allow me to continue to thrive or evolve. If those factors are not in play, then it can tremendously minimize the thought process of the individual, male or female, even how to fully process or properly interact in their society from a collective and more sustainable stance. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you. That was a great perspective. County Attorney Mears, I'd love for you to chime in as well about how do you help juveniles evolve or change? And I'd like for you to go that next step too. So how should our current laws change in order to help with that?
Well, I think part of it is you have to understand who you're dealing with, and right now, because we don't have that pre-trial or pre-decision evaluation process, we don't oftentimes know the person on the other side of the table and what are the things that could help best benefit that individual. So I think part of it is we as a prosecutor's office, the judiciary, everybody involved needs to have a better understanding of the person who's sitting on the other side of the table. What's the background? What's the environment? What resources have been tried in the past? What resources are available now that could hopefully ultimately benefit this person, moving down. Where are they at cognitively? What are the things that maybe we can do to better understand this person, to see what we can do to try to help out, so we never see that person again in the criminal justice system. But if we just say we're afraid of people, we're not going to be in a position to help people. And so we have to be willing to try to understand the person on the other side. But in order to understand that person, it can't just be, we're going to send you to adult court. We need to really have a thorough background and investigation into that person's life, into their family life, see where they're at cognitively, see where they're at mentally, to see if there is a plan that could be put in place that could ultimately make a difference for this person outside of just sending them to adult prison. And that's one of the biggest areas where I think that we can grow as a criminal justice system is having that meaningful conversation where you get everybody in the room to have that conversation about what would be truly in the best interest of this particular child. No one is going to lose sight of accountability. Everybody understands that there needs to be consequences to actions, but as a part of those consequences, that can also be constructive in terms of giving that person the tools they need to be successful moving forward. The overwhelming majority of people that we encounter in our criminal justice system that are young people have, unfortunately, very similar traits as it relates to their educational level, as it relates to their level of maturity, as it relates to their family life or family structure. We see these common denominators in many different types of cases. And so what can we do to help better address those issues that put that person in the criminal justice system? And I think if we do that, we can produce better outcomes that are going to provide opportunities for those people when they come back into our community to hopefully be successful, like James has said.
And John, I see you're back with us. I would love for you to kind of couch a couple answers here together, which is one, the impacts to the individual, the juvenile that actually went through the adult system. And then how would you say we can fix that system? How can we make it better?
I think the impact is significant. So as I was growing up in the system, it was very, very difficult for me to reconcile two worlds. I was very much trying to become a better man, become a period, but a man with character and values that would be looked upon favorably by society, that would be about doing the right thing and living my faith, but trying to reconcile that with the rules of the penitentiary. And you do like I was incarcerated from the age of 15 to 46. So in that time, you do anything for 30 years, it becomes part of who you are. So I have traits that I've had to internalize that are from that world. And they're very much a part of who I am today, in terms of how I carry myself, how I interact with other people or don't. It's hard for me social because you learn very quickly that less association, less conflict. So my tendency is to draw back. There is very little resources within the prison. Most of the programs are perfunctory. They look good on paper. In actual practice, nobody wants to do them. And therefore you don't get anything out of them. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that we can make is I managed to change because I found meaning. And I think there's two fundamental aspects for a juvenile in prison that need to be present for them to evolve. That is hope. There has to be some type of hope and some type of purpose. And the prison is not designed for you to have either one of those things.
John, you kind of alluded to this now, but you told me previously that you changed not because of prison, but in spite of prison. And I just thought that was such a key part of your story. Josh, I'd like for you to answer the question too about how the system should change, but there's also a question from one of our attendees that I feel like you can loop into that answer. And the question is, Josh says that he's discussing not closing the door on waiver entirely, but is there developmental science data, et cetera, to support closing that door?
Well, look, I mean, the proposal that's on the table is about ending auto charging based on the offense. And, I am absolutely supportive of the guts behind that question. We don't make exceptions that say that a, 16-year-old is allowed to buy alcohol, because of things that they did, that if they show enough responsibility, we will treat the 16-year-old as an adult or let them join the army. We draw some lines in this country. So I support the idea behind this question, but that's not what's on the table in the state legislature. It's the idea of whether all cases should start in juvenile court with a door open that could send some of them into adult court. And that's what we're discussing today. I mean, the one thing I really wanted to jump in on, it came in on the idea of consequences. The juvenile system has all sorts of confidentiality provisions in there. And so for the most part, we don't know what happens with kids. And so what that means is that when, they shoplift or get into fights, that the record is sealed and they move on with their lives. And, you can look back on the mistakes that you made as a teenager yourself and be glad that everyone doesn't have to know about that. But what that means on the more serious offenses is that we also don't know what happens for a kid charged in juvenile court on robbery or car theft or something like that. Indiana has a perfectly capable system for keeping the doors closed. And in fact, Indiana's commitment rate, that's the youth system's equivalent of prisons, is 65% higher than the national average. It's 109 per 100,000 kids in the state versus a national average of 66. That's 109 versus 66. So while the public may not be aware of what happens with any particular case, it's not a slap on the wrist. I think that's the phrase you hear often, the assumption that the juvenile system won't give a consequence. Well, in Indiana, it does give a consequence and does so frequently. Lisa, you're again muted.
Professor, I would love for you to weigh in too, just about what changes should be made. And then I also want for you to include one of the attendee questions, which is actually based off something that James said earlier, which mentioned a pattern that developed in his younger years. But when young people first become court involved at the juvenile level, what preventative practices have been proven to deter further involvement in the court system? So if you can talk about both the changes that need to be made, but also what is out there that has proven to be effective for prevention of criminal activity with juveniles.
Sure. So I'm probably echoing what some of our other panelists have talked about in terms of with the option that's being considered right now that's on the table, the ability for all of the cases to start in juvenile court means that we start with the premise that juveniles are youth, that they are kids, right? And a system that is designed to respond to youth who are not fully developed is the one that they start with, right? And folks who are trained and informed and understand and have an idea about intervention and so forth, that seems like the developmentally appropriate approach. If a kid is going to be engaged in a system, let's start with the system that is more designed for them than the adult system, which is not designed at all, right, to take into account developmental change or developmental capacity. In terms of the question in the chat about, I think it said if a youth has started becoming involved in the juvenile justice system, what kind of preventive measures? So we could spend a whole nother hour talking about intervention possibilities and things that are there. So, but there's quite a wide range, and one of the things that I think is quite positive and helpful about a juvenile court approach is the ability to tailor responses to the individual circumstances and needs of the youth that come before the court, right? So for some youth, it may be that no further intervention after that initial contact, right, is needed. We know so many young people, particularly ones that come in on very small or status offenses, right, are not going to continue offending, right? But for those that there may need to be some intervention or preventive intervention, there's a huge range of things that span mental health and family services and educational services. So I don't mean to duck the question, but there's a lot of possibilities and interventions that are supported by data, right, and by evaluation, not just by good intentions or good ideas, that can demonstrate effectiveness with a wide range of youth and a wide range of offenses that those youth may be coming into the system charged with.
Thank you. And one thing that you had commented on is that the adult court is not really meant for juveniles and not tailored towards them. So my next question from an attendee is going to go to you, County Attorney Mears. As this person states, and as you have mentioned, there are some cases that a juvenile, regardless of direct file, will still be waived into adult court. Knowing that not every juvenile is going to remain in juvenile court, are there adjustments that can be made to the criminal court to be tailored to the reality that it is a child who's being prosecuted?
I'd certainly like to think so, and would certainly hope so. You know, I think all of us want access to the best available information in terms of how we can best serve the needs of an individual person as well as the community as a whole. And but part of that is there has to be something in the system that allows for that inquiry to take place, and there needs to be, okay, even if you are a juvenile who's now been charged as an adult, you know, what are we doing, or what information are we providing to the judge? What information are we providing to the prosecutor's office? What resources are we giving the public defender or other people involved to really be able to have the ability to do a deep dive into what's going on with this child, so we can present the best information available to people, so we can come up with a solution that can serve the interest of that child. And I think it's really important to realize too, we have to be able to give judges options. You know, a lot of times the judges have very binary choices. You're going to jail or you're going to community corrections. Why isn't there something else? And what possibilities are out there where a judge can say, hey, we just did a deep dive into this child's background. We believe that this type of programming or this type of structure would ultimately benefit the child. Does the judge have the ability to order it, and does the judge have the ability to pay for it? And oftentimes the answer is no in adult court. And so I think we need to open ourselves up to making that investment and better understanding the person. But number two, making sure that we have the resources when we have that information. How can we tailor an outcome that will ultimately address the underlying issues or causes?
Thank you. And we only have 3 minutes left. So I have 2 more questions from attendees that are both for you, County Attorney Mears. If we have some free time, I would like to hit John and James at the very end for some last minute thoughts. For a piece by NPR that just came out today, this attendee says, I heard this story this morning and wondered if it's the same case for juveniles in direct file. It has to do with pleading guilty. So do they plead despite being innocent to just get through the process, or due to misunderstanding or coercion? And I don't know if you've heard that piece, but if you could talk a little bit about plea deals and how you've seen that maybe play out with juveniles in adult court.
Is that for me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's always a concern, is you want people pleading guilty, not because they're trying to get out of jail, but because they are in fact guilty. And they also understand the nature of the consequence. You know, I think a lot of people that you encounter, especially individuals who are young, don't really have an appreciation for what they're signing up for, and what that truly means when they sign up for the plea agreement. And so, you know, I think a lot of times it's making sure that not only the court, but the public defender and other people involved in the criminal justice system are really educating that kid about exactly what they're signing up for and what that commitment means. If they're going to say, hey, you're going to the Department of Correction, or you're going to be placed on community corrections. And so I'm sure it does happen. But I think one of the most important things is a lot of times what I see is people who maybe, hey, the state does have a decent case and they're able to move forward and, you know, have a pretty good chance of likelihood of success at trial. But then when it comes to the ultimate resolution, does that child actually understand and appreciate what they're signing their name to? And I think oftentimes the answer is no. And so I think that's an area where we can make significant improvement.
So we only have 1 minute left, and I'm going to ask you to try and speak on this as quickly as possible. And I'm going to put 2 questions, one for you, County Attorney. So the question is, 1, have you been accused of being soft on crime for supporting these kind of things? And
all the time.
2, where's the victim's perspective in this conversation? And I think those kind of go together. So if you could just quickly respond to that kind of idea.
Well, certainly there's going to, anytime you don't ask for a maximum sentence on every single case, people are going to say you're soft on crime. But ultimately the job of a prosecutor's office is to do justice. And justice can take many forms depending on the case and who you're dealing with. And so I think it's always important to keep that in mind. Number 2, you know, at the forefront of what we do has to be, what impact is this going to have on the victim, and how can we make the victim whole again? And, you know, I think that's one of the limitations of the juvenile system is we don't do that oftentimes for victims. I know that there's a lot of innovative solutions in other jurisdictions where, you know, restitution's made available to people through kids working off community service and things like that. Those are things that I think we can do in the state of Indiana. But certainly, I think one of the biggest challenges you have as a prosecutor is being able to make sure that you're in a position to bring justice to a victim. But what does justice look like in the juvenile system? It is a different conversation. And, you know, some victims understand that, other victims do not. But we also have to kind of play the hand that we're dealt when we're dealing, you know, when we're operating in the juvenile system.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think this was a great discussion and very enlightening of all the different perspectives of why we do need to change some of the laws in Indiana when we're talking about juveniles being prosecuted. Anybody that would like to contact us to get more information, I can put you in touch with some of the panelists if you reach out. But thank you for your time and attention today.
Thank you, guys.